Hello and welcome to Kentucky Case Files, a true crime podcast where we dive deep into Kentucky-based true crime stories, both infamous and overlooked. I'm Marcus Roland.
And I'm Emily Steele.
And this is the Clay Shrout case, part 3, Inside the Mind of a Psychopath. And today we're going to talk to Dr. Peter Langman, a psychologist and scholar who operates a website called schoolshooters.info that serves as a repository of resources dealing with school shootings, school safety, and violence prevention in general. And he's going to discuss various issues relating to why Clay might have done what he did. Welcome, Dr. Langman. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the details of this case.
My current position is Senior Advisor on Violence Prevention, and the company is called Zero Eyes. And that's all one word, Z-E-R-O, capital E-Y-E-S. And they're a violence prevention company. First of all, I'm a psychologist. So I don't work in schools and I don't work in law enforcement. But I was getting my PhD in counseling psychology in the 90s. And I was doing my internship at a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents. And on April 20th, 1999, there was the attack at Columbine High School. And even though I'm in Pennsylvania and Columbine's in Colorado, of course, that incident had a national, if not global, impact.
Yeah.
And just 10 days after Columbine, on April 30th, 1999, we had a 16-year-old boy with a hit list admitted to the hospital because he was seen as a Columbine-type risk. Of course, in the immediate aftermath of Columbine, schools were on high alert for any potential danger. People saw the warning signs, his odd behavior, a homicidal threat on his website, and they got him to our hospital, and I was assigned the case to do a psychological evaluation. And then after he left, there was another potential school shooter who came to the hospital. Then another one. And after my internship, I was hired. I was there over 12 years. And all too often, I was sitting face-to-face in my office with a young person planning mass murder, often at schools, not only at schools, sometimes they had other targets in mind, but I had never had an interest in violent offenders or mass murder before, but there I was in my office meeting with people at risk for that type of behavior. So that ended up becoming the focus of my career. There was an unexpected turn my life and career took. I had no idea at the time with that first client in 1999, but looking back, that had a profound impact on me.
And shifting now to the Clay Shrout case, this was, of course, 5 years before that. So what specifically took you back in time, so to speak, to approach the Clay Shrout case?
As I started writing about school shooters, in my first book, I looked at 10 perpetrators, all at the K-12 level, except for one at Virginia Tech, which was in higher education. And at that point, I was only looking back a little bit before Columbine. But then my second book looked at 48 perpetrators. I really expanded my research. So I became aware of other incidents prior to Columbine. And even though Clay Shrout did not commit a school shooting he had planned to do, he came very close to doing so. And there was some information available on him. So I decided he was worth looking into to see what insights we might gain.
We talked about what motivated him, and he gives a couple of different reasons for doing what he did. He talks about wanting to run away versus slaughtering his family, which is what happened. He also talked about going to the school and killing, I think it was an English teacher maybe, and one of the administrators you talked about, because they had been involved in suspending him for the stun gun. And then later on, he talks about in his parole hearing, he indicates some of this was related to sexual abuse by his mom. And that was the very first time that ever was mentioned. That was 25 years later. It was at his time of his very first opportunity for hearing on parole. I find that not believable to come 25 years later and bring up something like that. Does that kind of thing factor into the mind of a psychopath?
Definitely. I have no idea whether or not his mom had ever abused him in any way, but in
Yeah.
the absence of any evidence that she did, and knowing that he had psychopathic traits, I'm extremely skeptical of
Yeah.
that claim. And we've seen that same kind of claim made by other perpetrators years after they're in prison or facing possible parole or just challenging their sentence in some kind of an appeal. There was one in Southern California, a 15-year-old boy named Charles Andrew Williams, who initially said, no, I wasn't picked on, and I was mad at my dad because he was like expecting me to go to school and do my homework, and I was mad at the school because they expected me to show up and do my homework.
Yeah.
But then as the trial and imprisonment continued, he started claiming I was being horribly beaten up by these kids in a park, and oh, my dad did this, and oh, somebody molested me. He just throwing out every excuse he could think of. And we saw that also with Brenda Spencer, 16-year-old girl in 1979 in San Diego, who committed maybe the most cold-blooded school shooting I've ever studied.
Mm.
Just absolutely heartless, no conscience, no empathy. And every parole hearing would come up with new excuses, and she would lie. And if the first lie didn't work, 5 seconds later, she's trying another lie.
Wow.
And that included, I was abused at home, someone molested me. And I think when it comes to psychopaths, they will say and do anything they can to benefit them. And truth has no bearing in the matter. And especially if they're in prison and they can mitigate their sentence or get out earlier, they will say anything.
Is it a nurture versus nature situation? Are you born that way? Is it something that develops through experiences?
It really depends on who you ask and what definition you look at. I've been impressed by the work of Dr. Robert H.A.R.E., who may have been the world's leading expert on psychopathy.
Hmm.
And he seemed to come down more in favor of nature. People are born that way,
Okay.
but with the understanding that how you're raised could have a powerful impact on you. So if you're born that way in a stable, loving, nurturing family, you might not become a violent criminal. You might be more of a white-collar psychopath and bend the rules and cheat and so on. But if you're raised in a violent home and you're abused, maybe you're more likely to go down a violent path yourself. Not that it's that simple, because we've had people like Eric Harris at Columbine come from, as far as we can tell, a well-functioning family, no known history of abuse or violence in the home, commit a horrible attack. But there is reason to think it's largely how people come into the world. At the biological level, their brains are different, and there's increasing amount of research on the brains of psychopaths versus non-psychopaths in terms of how they register emotion, if they register certain emotions. Biologically, there are some differences that have been identified.
He gives a variety of reasons as to why he did what he did and what he wanted to do. So he wanted some type of freedom from his situation, but yet he goes to the school and he later tells one of the officers that he wanted to basically die by suicide by cop. Yet he then turned himself over, defeating the overall reasoning behind doing what he did. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Human beings are complicated. We all may sometimes act on or make decisions based on things that we're not even aware of in ourselves. And maybe years later, we'll reflect back and say, yeah, I thought I was doing it because of this, but really now I can see it was because of this other motivation. I don't know that Clay Shrout had any idea why he was doing what he was doing. It's not necessarily rational. And if you try to make something make sense that's not rational to begin with, you're not going to succeed. Because if you think about it, so he wanted freedom. His parents imposed on his freedom. They expected him to go to college. He resented the fact that they assumed he would go to college. But if freedom is your value, why commit an act that's going to totally eliminate your freedom for the rest of your life? It does not make sense. If he'd wanted to run away, he could have run away. If he simply didn't apply to college, he wouldn't go to college. What was it really about? We don't know. It could have been that for psychopaths, anyone with power over them, anyone trying to control their lives, is so infuriating that those people deserve to die. And his parents obviously had some influence or control over him. And maybe he resented that to such an extent and was so lacking in compassion, empathy, and a conscience, he took care of the problem in his mind. It could be that simple. But there's also that piece, first thing he does, he walks out of the house after killing his entire family and sees some stranger and says, "Hey, my name's Clay Shrout. You're going to hear a lot about me. I'm going to be on CNN."
Yeah.
For a lot of perpetrators, they engage in what we call fame-seeking behavior, or it's a fame-seeking motivation. They want to be known. They maybe feel like nobody. They want to be this big somebody. They're not willing to work and achieve anything meaningful. So for them, it's a shortcut from going from nobody to somebody just by killing people, and then you're all over the news.
Sure.
So it could have been a resentment of his parents because they had power over him. There could have been the fame-seeking component. We don't know, but what he offered as rationales really made no sense. Why he killed the parents, why he killed his sisters, they explained nothing.
Is there ever hope for reform for someone like this? And I think that would be a significant factor in a parole hearing.
It's a very murky area, and I don't like to be without hope for people. The track record of treatment of psychopaths, though, is not very encouraging. Now, some people have reported some therapeutic successes with them. I don't want to write off the possibility that someone could change enough to be able to function in society. When I go back to the kids I was evaluating in the psychiatric facility, none of them went on to commit a mass attack.
Mm-hmm.
But they had not done so yet. And psychopathy, like anything else, can exist on a spectrum from mild to severe. And also, maybe when you're younger, you're more malleable. People can have more impact on you if you enter treatment when you're 15 than if you're 40 or 50. So there could be multiple factors in play. If someone's younger and on the less severe end of the spectrum of psychopathic traits, I'd say there's more hope. By the time someone's been in prison for years and has committed mass murder in such a cold-blooded way, just the act itself suggests he's at the severe end of the psychopathic spectrum. I don't know if he's ever apologized. Maybe you've seen that. The fact that he may have said the words doesn't mean they held any real meaning for him. Psychopaths often don't apologize because they cannot accept that they ever did anything wrong. And if they can't see that they did anything wrong, there's not much hope for rehabilitation.
He did acknowledge in the hearing that he regretted doing what he did. I thought at least he pretended to show some regret over what he did. But I found it particularly enlightening that when John Murphy, his preacher at his church, saw him, he said that Clay was pretty much devoid of any type of emotion, reaction that you would
Right.
expect someone to have after doing something like this.
And he may have regretted it, but the key question is why? Did he regret it because now he spent his life in
Sure.
prison?
Good
Or did
point.
he have any real gut-wrenching sense of the enormity of what he had done? His parents and his sisters, for no reason, he took their lives away in a really brutal, sadistic manner, and he didn't seem to care. So he may regret that he's been in prison, but does that mean there's any real conscience or empathy there?
I also found it interesting that he told his friend that you could go out to the house and see the bullet in the window and get whatever you want. Nobody's going to need it anyway.
It would be expected for someone who has just committed that kind of act to be hyperventilating, sweating, sobbing, maybe vomiting. They shot their family members in the head, the blood, whatever splattered brains there may have, to have done that. And again, not just to strangers, but to his own family, and then walk out the door and proudly announce he's going to be on CNN suggests, like I said, the severe end of the psychopathic spectrum. the brutality of it. I'm not hearing that there's any real remorse or understanding of what he had done.
So I guess to draw us back to that, is there hope for rehabilitation? Probably in Clay's case, no, and that may have had a lot to do with why the board extended his sentence 10 more years before he would be allowed to seek parole again.
And I remember reading, after just several years in prison, he had a 29-page list of infractions.
Oh
So
yeah.
even if he's in prison, he's not following the rules. He's disobedient. He's impervious to authority. He just doesn't care. He's going to do his own thing. Personality may have been one to simply not care about the rules and to deliberately break the rules, to say, in your face, Mr. Prison Guard, and what are you going to do to me now? He's already in prison. Maybe he felt like he didn't have much to lose, so he was just going to break the rules and see what happened, or maybe got a kick out of breaking the rules. Because again, same way he resented his parents having any control over him, he was maybe not about to let the prison have the kind of control over him it wanted. So he was going to constantly battle against that level of control.
He pled guilty but mentally ill, and they could not have forced him to undergo any mental health treatment. And indeed, he has not undergone any mental health treatment. I think maybe there was one evaluation. What does that say, if anything?
The fact that he has not pursued any treatment suggests he didn't need mental health treatment, and he was just saying that to, again, mitigate his sentence. And that's not unusual for psychopaths to survive the attack. Some have been known to go online and read about schizophrenia or autism and then try to fake the symptoms and
Wow.
lie to their psychiatrist or psychologists to try to get that mitigation of the sentence. I don't know if he did that, but the fact that he claimed mental illness and never sought or accepted any treatment suggests to me, again, in the overall picture of what we know about him, that he was just making it all up.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
In the article I wrote about him, I talked about his fascination with weapons. And that's something that's common among school shooters, whether they're psychopathic or not. And also some hints that he was not happy with himself as a person or his physique. He had been overweight. He took some medication and became very thin and apparently frail and was not very athletic. And I think identity, self-concept is often wrapped up in these cases. So the fascination with weapons could have been his way of compensating for feeling inadequate as a male. He had a breakup with a girl. That was another blow to his sense of self. That behind even psychopathic behavior, there's often that internal fragility of a sense of not measuring up. So they may be overcompensating by trying to be big and strong, get their hands on weapons, use weapons as a way to make a name for themselves, perhaps as a way to enhance their sense of themselves by being powerful rather than feeling weak. I don't know how much that plays in with this case, but that certainly is a common dynamic with school shooters and other violent people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Langman. Next on Kentucky Case Files, we will present Clay Shrout Part 4. That was how, this is why, where we will attempt to draw some conclusions on why Clay did what he did and try to make some sense, if possible, in the Clay Shrout case. Sourcing for this podcast came from the Cincinnati Post, the Kentucky Post, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Courier Journal, and the Lexington Herald Leader, which covered the killings widely and was our primary information source, along with Peter Langman's February 2016 article, Clay Shrout, and analysis, which can be found at www.schoolshooters.info. Media clips were obtained from WLWT Channel 5 and WXIX Fox 19 in Cincinnati. Additional interviews have supplemented our reporting.